Hi Year 5, I hope you're all okay. Welcome to the second instalment of our topic book, Gulliver's Travels. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. So we last saw Gulliver being picked up by a bird and being dropped into the sea. So let's find out what happened next. At last the sea flung my box upon a rocky shore. I was much tumbled about, but not hurt. My box, however, sustained a blow that broke the clasps of the lid, and so I was able to scramble out. Climbing to a high point, I saw that I had arrived at a desolate, rocky island. I realised how impossible it would be to survive in such a place, and how miserable my death would be. Dejectedly, I walked a while. The sky was perfectly clear, and the sun hot. All of a sudden, I saw something vast in the air coming towards me. It was a solid object about 2 miles high, with a rocky underside. I took out my pocket telescope and, to my astonishment, could see people moving up and down the sides of it. It seemed to be a flying island. I waved my handkerchief and shouted with the utmost strength of my voice. In a few moments, a crowd gathered on the side of the island nearest me. Plainly they saw me, although they made no reply to my shouting. The island was then lowered, and a chain was let down, with a seat fastened to the end. Those who stood nearest made signs for me to climb on, and I was drawn up by pulleys. Arriving on the island, I was surrounded by a crowd of people. They looked at me in wonder, as I did them. Though they were my own size, they seemed to me tiny after the people of Brobdingnag. Their heads were all tilted either to the right or to the left. One of their eyes turned inward and the other directly upwards. Their clothes were adorned with pictures of sun, moon, stars, and musical instruments. Some of the people carried an inflated bladder fastened to the end of a short stick. In each bladder, I later learned, was a small quantity of dried peas or little pebbles. With these bladders, they now and then flapped the mouths and ears of those who stood near them. It seems the minds of these people are so lost in thought that they can neither speak nor listen to others without being alerted by flapping. I was led up the stairs to the top of the island and then to the royal palace. There I saw the king seated on his throne. In front of him were globes, spheres, and mathematical instruments of all kinds. The king took no notice of me, as he was deep in a problem, and I waited at least an hour until he had solved it. Then one of the king's flappers gently struck his mouth and another his ear. He started like one suddenly awoken. He spoke some words, and a young man came and flapped me on the ear, but I made a sign to say there was no need. I tried to make myself understood, but without success, so I was sent away to learn their language. Soon I learnt that the land was called Laputa, which means flying island. I also learnt that Laputans are forever worrying about changes in the stars and planets. They are so alarmed that they cannot sleep well at night, nor take any pleasure in the unusual amusements of life. Okay, and then down here we have matters of grave concern. So I'll bring you down. Matters of grave concern: that the sun will eventually swallow up the earth, that the face of the sun will one day become so encrusted it will give no more light to the world, that in 31 years' time a passing comet will reduce the earth to ashes, that the sun will run out of energy with which it creates light, and so the earth will perish with it. Although I cannot say that I was ill-treated in this island, I must confess I thought I was very much neglected. The king and his people were so lost in thought that I never met with such disagreeable companions. There was one exception to this, a great lord at court who was thought to be the most ignorant and stupid person. for he was interested in practical matters, not theoretical ideas. I, however, enjoyed his company. He often paid me the honour of a visit and wanted to be informed about the laws and customs of Europe. He listened to me with great attention, making no use of flappers at all. I was now very weary of Laputa, and so I asked this distinguished person if he could obtain royal permission for me to leave and visit the lower island, which I had learnt was part of the same kingdom. He not only did this, but offered to accompany me as my guide. The flying island cannot stray far from the lower island due to a magnetic force, so it was simple enough for us to be let down from the lowest level of the flying island in the same manner as which I had arrived. My kind friend took me in a chariot to see the capital city of the lower island. On our way through the countryside, I saw many labourers working the land, but I did not see anything growing, although the soil appeared to be excellent. The city itself was about half the bigness of London, but the houses were very strangely built, and most of them in need of repair. The people in the streets were mostly dressed in rags. I asked my guide if he could explain to me why the country was in this state. He told me that about 40 years before, some inhabitants had gone up to Laputa for a visit. Upon their return, these persons began to dislike the way the lower island was being managed. They wanted a fresh start, made in all arts, sciences, languages, and mechanics. So, to this end, they obtained permission from the king to set up an academy of inventions. I was very curious to see this academy, and my guide willingly led me to it. It was not a single building, but a row of several houses. Each room in each house contained one or more inventors. I believe there were no fewer than 500 rooms in all. Here the professors were busy inventing new methods of agriculture and building, and new instruments and tools for all trades and manufactures. Their claims for these inventions were extraordinary. Some inventions, I was told, would enable one man to do the work of 10. Others would mean that a palace could be built in a week, of materials so strong they would last forever without needing repairs. Still others would bring the fruits of the earth to ripen at whatever season we thought fit to choose. The only inconvenience was that none of these projects was ever completed, and in the meantime the whole country suffered. Its houses were in ruins, and its people were without food or clothes. My visit, being no less dispiriting than it was astonishing, made me all the more anxious to return home to England. With humble thanks to my noble companion, I took my leave, and set out to find, I hoped, a port and a ship. Okay, and then these flaps open to see some inventors, so I will bring you closer. In this room, the walls and ceiling were festooned with cobwebs. This inventor hoped to find a way to make spiders spin silk. For 8 years, this inventor had been trying to extract sunbeams from cucumbers. In just 8 years more, he believed he would do it. By rubbing a lamb's skin with a certain mixture of gums, minerals, and vegetables, this inventor hoped to stop the growth of wool. This professor's aim was to turn ice into gunpowder. He believed it would be a very useful task once he had perfected it. This professor was attempting to soften marble so that it could be made into pillows and pincushions. He had not yet succeeded. This clever professor had come up with a new way to build houses by beginning at the roof and working downwards. At the nearest port, I was told I must wait a month for a ship bound in what, by my best guess, was the correct direction for England. It was suggested I pass the time by taking a trip to the nearby island of Glub-Dub-Drib. Glub-Dub-Drib means the island of sorcerers. Its governor is the head of a certain tribe who are all magicians. When I arrived, I asked permission to visit him. This was immediately granted, and I entered the gate of his palace, passing between 2 rows of guards who were armed and dressed in a very bizarre manner. Something about their faces made my flesh creep with a horror I cannot express. When I arrived at the governor's chamber, he asked me to give him some account of my travels. Then he dismissed all his attendants with a turn of his finger, at which, to my great astonishment, they vanished like visions in a dream. Seeing my surprise, the governor explained why his servants are somewhat unusual. He has the power to call whom he pleases from the dead and command their service for 24 hours. The governor then invited me to call up whatever people I choose, from among all the dead from the beginning of the world to the present time, and command them to answer any questions I should like to ask. First, I desired to see Alexander the Great at the head of his army. Then, upon a motion of the governor's finger, Alexander the Great immediately appeared outside the window. Alexander was called up into the room. Despite my difficulty in following his Greek, I understood him to say that he was not poisoned, as some people believe, but died of a fever brought on by too much drinking. Next, I saw Hannibal crossing the Alps with his elephants. Then I saw Caesar and Pompey at the head of their troops, ready to do battle. I had a desire to see the world in every period of history. It would be tedious to relate what vast numbers of famous people I called up from different ages, but I may say that I was mostly disgusted with the modern history. 3 kings told me that in their whole reigns they never once granted high office to a good person, unless by mistake. This was because, they said, the positive, restless spirit which good people have gets in the way of business. I was curious then to ask how honour and fortunes were gained. A large number of persons were called up. Some confessed to betraying their country, some to poisoning, others to further evil deeds. Next, I asked to see people who had genuinely done great services to their countries. When they appeared, it was with dejected looks and in the shabbiest clothes, for most of them had died in poverty and disgrace. These discoveries, I admit, lessened the respect I naturally tend to pay for people of high rank, and I left His Highness the Governor of Glub-Dub-Drib with a heavy heart. I returned to the port I had embarked from. There, after a further fortnight's wait, I was at last told that a ship was ready to set sail in what I hoped was the right direction for Europe. It was a ship of ill fortune, for, once we were at sea, I discovered that the crew were pirates. I feared I would be murdered, but instead I was rowed to a deserted beach and abandoned. I walked inland in despair, resolving to give myself up to the first savages I met. But I saw only strange animals in a field, and 1 or 2 of them sitting in trees. They had brown skin, and their heads and bodies were covered in wiry, thick hair, with strong claws on all of their front and back feet. I never in all my travels saw an animal for which I felt such an instant dislike. The next moment, one of these ugly monsters leapt in front of me. I drew my sword and gave him a good blow with the flat side of it. The beast roared so loudly that a herd of at least 40 came flocking. I ran to a tree and, leaning my back against it, kept them off by waving my sword. Then, to my surprise, they suddenly ran away. I looked about for the cause of their fear and saw a grey horse walking softly towards me. It looked at me in wonder. Then a second horse appeared. The 2 creatures struck each other's right hoof in greeting, neighing several times. Then they walked side by side, backward and forward, like people discussing some important matter, and often turning their eyes towards me. The behaviour of these animals was so astonishing that I decided they must be magicians who had changed their shape. "Gentlemen," I said to them, "I am a poor distressed Englishman, driven by his misfortunes upon your coast. I beg one of you to let me ride upon your back to some house or village where I can find help." The two creatures seemed to listen with great attention. When I had ended, they neighed at each other, as if in conversation. Then the grey horse led me to a low-roofed wooden house, inside which were more horses. Often I heard the word "Yoo-hoo" repeated. Soon I learnt its meaning, to my everlasting shame. One of the creatures I had met after my landing was brought to stand beside me, and our faces were carefully compared. My horror and astonishment are not to be described when I realised that this abominable animal was just like a human being. Yeehad's going to love that word. He loves using that in his writing. I repeated the word Yahoo and tried another I had heard. Hoo-yim-yim. The grey horse was clearly astonished that a brute animal like me was so keen to learn. After this, he spent many hours teaching me. I learnt that hoo-yum-yum signifies a horse and means the perfection of nature. My master, for so I called him, was very curious to know where I was from, and I told him about life in Europe as fully as I could. And then down here it says the Yahoo. Dirty. Hair can be brown, black, red or yellow. Claws grow long if left uncut, useful for climbing trees. Won't share, fights often, and fond of shiny stones. The Hoo-yim-yums are naturally virtuous and have no idea how a thinking creature can do evil. Consequently, most of what I told my master about Europe puzzled him. He was particularly interested to learn the causes of war, but I found it a hard task to explain these to him, as their language has no words for such things as war, power and money. Meanness is likewise unknown amongst them. Whenever there are Hoo-num-nums who lack food or other necessities, which is rarely, all others give generously and freely to satisfy the need. More and more I came to see how wise they are. Soon I felt such love and respect for them that I had no desire to return to humankind. But return I had to. My master sent for me one morning. He told me that his fellow Hoo-num-nums, realising I was a kind of Yahoo, urged that I should go back to my native land to live with my family, who were surely in great need of me. With a heavy heart, I obediently set about making a boat. In 6 weeks I had finished a sort of large canoe with paddles and a sail. When the time came for me to leave, I bid a tearful farewell to my master and pushed off from the shore. After many days paddling, I encountered a Portuguese sailing ship whose crew dragged me aboard. The ship, as luck would have it, was bound for England. When at last we docked, I travelled straight to my old house. There, my wife and children received me with surprise and joy, having been certain I was dead. I could not forget the Hoo-num-nums, however. My first act, as soon as I had saved some money, was to buy 2 young stallions. At the time of writing, it is 5 years since my return to England, and my favourite occupation is to spend time with my horses. I never put a bridle or saddle on them. Instead, I talk with them for at least 4 hours every day. The end. Okay, and that's the end of our topic book. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Good luck with your home learning, and I will speak to you all soon.